Perhaps the price of seeing the world as it is no longer being able to live in it as before. This sentence is not in a famous book, nor is it said by a great philosopher, but perhaps it sums up an anguish that many carry in silence. Because the more you realize, the more you lose the ability to ignore, and the more you understand, the less you can just exist. It's as if lucidity, which once seemed liberating, slowly turns into an invisible cage, made up of thoughts that don't stop, questions that have no answers, and a sensitivity that captures everything, including what it would be more comfortable not to see. What if what kept us from happiness wasn't a lack of luck, opportunities, or love, but an excess of lucidity? Have you ever felt that you know too much? That you understand too much? That you notice things that others simply don't, and maybe that's why they're lighter? Have you ever had the feeling that the clearer the world becomes to your eyes, the darker it seems inside? It's not an illusion, no freshness, no drama. It's a real and increasingly common experience. An entire generation is awakening to a sharper awareness of reality, of relationships, of time, of the end. But along with this expansion of perception comes a new burden, that of living with the clarity that everything is transitory, uncertain, fragile. That of seeing behind the scenes of every beautiful scene, the weight of no longer being able to let yourself be carried away by small happinesses without immediately thinking about how they will end. We live in times when thinking has become synonymous with pain, where looking deeply is the same as moving away, where knowing is almost a self-imposed punishment. And this brings us to a profound dilemma, which runs from ancient philosophy to modern cartoons. Is ignorance, after all, bliss? An episode of Rick and Morty explores this idea brutally. Rick, the cynical genius who understands absolutely everything, from the universe to human emotions, confesses that he prefers not to love, not because he can't, but because he knows too much. He knows that love ends, that everything passes, that pleasure is ephemeral, and that the more you allow yourself to feel, the more you open the door to suffering. So, as a defense, he shields himself. He puts on the armor of indifference. He convinces himself that nothing is worthwhile, precisely because he knows enough to anticipate the end. And this knowledge becomes a prison. But this trap is not exclusive to fictional geniuses. It inhabits many of us. Just look around, or inside. The person who studies the structures of the human mind in depth and then feels out of place among shallow conversations. The person who understands the impermanence of relationships so well that they avoid getting attached. The person who reads so much about the nature of desire that they can no longer desire without guilt. It's not about being intellectual, it's about being too sensitive to reality. In this video, we'll delve into this paradox. Why is it that the more we know, the harder it seems to be happy? Why does lucidity, which should liberate, so often suffocate? And is there a way out of this? Or are we condemned to suffer simply because we see too much? From here, we begin an uncomfortable, but necessary, journey. Because perhaps, in the end, the problem isn't knowing too much, but not knowing what to do with everything you know. There's a kind of suffering that doesn't come from what happens around us, but from the way we perceive what happens. A kind of anguish that arises not from reality itself, but from the sharpness with which we see it. It's as if the world, seen through the eyes of a mind that is too lucid, loses its layers of protection, its distractions, its comforting illusions, and everything becomes too raw, too clear, and therefore unbearable at times. The more you understand, the more you notice. The more you notice, the less you can pretend. And the less you can pretend, the more difficult it becomes to inhabit a world that depends on a certain amount of unconsciousness to be tolerable. Everyday life is made up of automatisms, routines, promises, rituals, little hopes fabricated to give structure to chaos. But extreme lucidity, that ability to perceive the arbitrariness of rules, the fragility of bonds, the impermanence of everything, breaks this automatism. What's left is a kind of internal exile. You're here, but you don't belong anymore. This is not a new phenomenon. Literature, philosophy, and art are full of characters who collapse under the weight of their own conscience. Van Gogh, for example, was not only destroyed by his pain, but by his sensitivity. He saw the world in colors that no one else could capture. He felt time and existence with an intensity that burned inside. His letters reveal a man who couldn't find rest even in the beauty he himself created. The awareness of finitude, loneliness, and incommunicability was eating him up inside. It wasn't madness, it was an excess of perception. Schopenhauer said that the more developed consciousness is, the more suffering grows. For him, the human being was a kind of aberration of natural instinct, a creature that thinks too much to live like animals, but doesn't have enough control to transcend the pain of the world. Intelligence was therefore a curse disguised as a gift. And although this view is bleak, it resonates with many people who feel that they know too much to be able to simply surrender to the now. And herein lies the key to the dilemma. Knowing too much is not the problem. The problem is what that knowing prevents you from feeling. Because the mind that sees everything, questions everything, and foresees all future failures begins to protect itself preventively. It doesn't want to delude itself. It doesn't want to be taken by surprise. It doesn't want to be hurt by naivety. So she arms herself. She shields herself. She creates filters, distances, emotional barriers. And in doing so, they often kill their own ability to experience the simplest and most valuable thing, the pleasure of being present. This excessive lucidity creates a kind of paralysis. You understand the game, but you can no longer play. You see the rules, but you don't believe in them. You recognize the cycles, passion, attachment, loss, rebuilding, and everything seems too programmed for you to truly surrender. Lucidity at this point turns into a sophisticated form of hopelessness, not a visible sadness, but a persistent feeling of being on a stage where you've read the entire script and know exactly how it all ends. And precisely because of this, you can no longer be moved by the play. But this raises a painful question. If lucidity really takes us away from the human experience, is it worth continuing to seek this kind of knowledge? If thinking, reflecting, and understanding too much robs us of the ability to feel lightly, is knowing always good? Or is there a kind of ignorance, not foolish, but conscious, that protects the soul from the exhaustion of seeing too much? This is the question that will accompany us. Because before we talk about pleasure, love, or meaning, we need to face up to this fact. The more the mind opens up, the more it loses the shelter of certainties, and that in itself is a difficult wound to close. Wake up, work, pay bills, sleep, and repeat it all over again the next day. Life goes by like this, and one day you realize that time has slipped away. Dreams were postponed. Opportunities went unnoticed. This happens because no one ever taught you how to see the game of life the right way. But there is another path. If you want to reach the next level, you need to access new knowledge. And that's exactly what you'll find in the White Rabbit Codes. This book will open your eyes to what is really happening. You'll understand why you keep getting stuck in the same cycles, learn how to escape autopilot, and start seeing the opportunities that were always there. And finally, you'll make decisions that truly lead to the life you've always wanted. If you feel ready for this change, the link is in the pinned comment. You'll be surprised at how simple it can be to increase your prosperity. Success is a decision. The choice is yours. There is a popular, almost intuitive idea that we were made to be happy, as if the search for pleasure were the natural state of human beings. But that's only half the truth, and perhaps it's precisely this half-truth that tortures us. Because, contrary to what contemporary culture suggests, the human brain was not designed for constant happiness, but for intermittent survival. And that changes everything. Because a lucid mind, once it understands these mechanics, can no longer delude itself with promises of lasting fulfillment, and frustration becomes almost inevitable. Pleasure is not a state, it's a peak, an electrical impulse, a passing chemical release. Dopamine, for example, so celebrated as the happiness hormone, doesn't reward us for being happy. It pushes us towards what could make us happy. It is a system of anticipation, not realization, and that's where the trap lies. Pleasure is conditioned by expectation. It is, by definition, an absence in motion. What moves the brain is not achievement, but desire. And when the desire is fulfilled, the excitement disappears. A mind that is too conscious realizes this too soon. It realizes that every ecstasy comes with a built-in expiration date, that the initial enthusiasm for a conquest, a love, a novelty, soon dissolves into routine, and that this dissolution is not a defect, it is the natural functioning of the mind. The name for this is hedonic adaptation. In order to focus on survival, our brains have been programmed to quickly get used to everything new. Joy becomes base. The extraordinary becomes normal. Yesterday's miracle is today's boredom. For those who don't realize this, life still has its simple ups and downs. But for those who understand the process, who see the curve before it forms, who the experience of pleasure loses some of its luster. It's like watching a movie knowing the ending. The food still tastes good. The touch still makes you shiver. But something shifts inside, a nagging awareness that this too will pass. And no matter how hard you try to be present, your mind is already on another scene, predicting the fall, registering the end. This lucidity generates a kind of subtle discouragement. You begin to realize that you're not unhappy, but you're not fully happy either. That joy comes, but never settles in. That even the most beautiful moments carry a slight shadow of anticipation of the end. And this can lead to two paths: the compulsive search for more intense stimuli or cynical withdrawal, where nothing else seems worth the effort. Both are traps for the same dilemma, knowing that happiness is, by its very nature, unsustainable. And here comes one of the greatest pains of those who think too much. Realizing that the more you understand the mechanisms of pleasure, the harder it is to surrender to it. You don't feel less, you feel through. The kiss isn't just the kiss, it's the beginning of a script you've already seen. The conquest isn't just a victory, it's the opening of a cycle you already know. Enthusiasm, adaptation, neutrality. And if everything follows this pattern, why still get excited? Why still allow yourself to feel, knowing that the feeling will dilute as usual? This is the prison of lucidity, seeing so much of how the mind works that you lose the pleasure of using it naively. The person who understands too much how the machine works sometimes forgets what it's like just to be inside it. And that's not a judgment. It's a realization that needs to be said out loud. Because it's only by accepting that the brain wasn't designed for continuous pleasure that we begin to rephrase the question that plagues us. Maybe the goal was never to be happy all the time. Maybe it's something else. But before trying to answer what this something else might be, we need to look at what we do with this knowledge. How do we react when we realize that pleasure is fleeting? How do we deal with the suspicion that happiness is too fragile to be trusted? Because this is where another, even more perverse behavior arises. That of starting to run away from joy before we even have it. There is a cruel paradox in the lucid mind. The more you desire happiness, the more you dread its arrival. And not because it's bad, but because it's too good to last. That's when pleasure, once eagerly desired, begins to be viewed with suspicion. It becomes a poisoned gift, a silent alarm that something very good is about to slip away. Joy becomes a warning that the fall will follow. And the more you understand this cycle, the more difficult it becomes to live within it lightly. This fear has a name, although it is rarely recognized: cherophobia, the unconscious aversion to pleasure itself. Not because it bothers us, but because it exposes us. Because to be happy is, in a way, to make yourself vulnerable. When you surrender to the now with intensity, you open yourself up to loss, to longing, to the future absence of what makes you happy today. And the lucid mind, which always anticipates, predicts, and calculates, begins to set off warning signals even in moments of peace. What if it ends tomorrow? What if it's too good to last? What if I get used to it and then lose everything? The consequence of this anticipation is devastating. The pleasure isn't over yet, but it has already begun to be avoided. The body wants it, the heart accepts it, but the mind retreats. And then the little invisible saboteurs appear. Strange decisions, unexplained distancing, conflicts provoked for no reason, all to create a sense of control. Because if you're the one who destroys, then at least you won't be taken by surprise. If you're the one who refuses joy, then you won't feel its absence. It's reasoning disguised as protection, but which, in practice, interrupts the very experience of living. This kind of mechanism is common in minds that understand too much. People who have experienced intense pain and today refuse to feel it without a backward step. People who have loved, lost, and understood, perhaps too soon, that nothing is guaranteed. And now, in the face of something good, they're already planning for the end. Pleasure stops being a gift and becomes a trap. A sign that, by clinging, you are automatically condemning yourself to loss. Love is the most extreme example of this fear. Because to love is, by definition, to expose yourself. It's handing over something you can't control. And for those who deeply understand the ephemeral nature of attachments, this sounds almost crazy. That's why many people avoid deep bonds. Not out of coldness, but because they're too clear-sighted. Because they know the cost. They know that loving means accepting an end that you don't choose. And for a mind that seeks security in everything, that's unbearable. Rick, once again, is the mirror of this dilemma. He knows everything. He's seen it all. He's lived long enough to understand that no connection is eternal, and that every attachment comes with a hidden goodbye note. So he prefers not to get involved. He prefers to live in irony, in denial, in a self-imposed coldness, because to believe in permanence would be to betray his intelligence. To love, in this scenario, would be to deny the cruel logic he has already unraveled. But at what cost? The cost is emptiness, emotional insomnia, the coldness that numbs both pain and beauty, life without a peak, but also without a presence. And this is the central point of this chapter, when lucidity paralyzes surrender, when knowledge anticipates the end so much that it prevents the beginning, when the awareness of impermanence robs us of the instant, and with it, the meaning of being alive. Perhaps, deep down, the fear is not of loss, but of allowing ourselves to feel something so good that the loss would become unbearable. Maybe the problem isn't the end, but the impact it would have on something that finally seemed worthwhile. And so we become experts at surviving, but amateurs at living. But is this paralyzing lucidity inevitable? Or is there another kind of consciousness, one that, even though it sees the end, still chooses to feel? To answer this, we need to face the absurdity head-on. And it's Camus who leads us to this next part. Is this content making you reflect and sparking new ways of thinking? If so, click the super thanks button just below the video. It's a way to say thank you and help me bring more content like this to those who need to reflect on life. At some point in the search for answers, the lucid mind stumbles upon an uncomfortable realization. Understanding the world is not the same as finding meaning in it. It's a subtle but devastating difference. Philosophy offers us tools to think more clearly, but not necessarily to live more lightly. Because understanding the structure of chaos, naming impermanence, identifying the mechanisms of suffering, all this can broaden consciousness, and at the same time erode the enchantment of being alive. Albert Camus called this the absurd, the clash between the human desire for meaning and the indifferent silence of the universe. We yearn for purpose, for order, for coherence, but reality, naked and stark, delivers none of these things by default. It just exists, unpredictable, indifferent, without a script. And for the lucid mind, which demands meaning like oxygen, this silence is unbearable. The absence of a response is not neutral. It is a form of existential violence. And that's where the absurd is born, in the abyss between what we seek and what we find. This dilemma hits those who think too much the hardest, because the more you investigate the origin of things, the whys, the mechanisms, the patterns, the more you come across the emptiness that surrounds them. And it's not a mystical or poetic emptiness. It's a dry, concrete, repetitive emptiness. The fact that life goes on, even when it doesn't make sense. Work goes on, days pass, bodies age, relationships change, and no definitive answer can be found. For many, that's enough. But for those who can't deactivate the question, the world becomes a heavy place to carry. Camus, contrary to what many people think, did not preach nihilism. He didn't say that life has no meaning, but that meaning isn't given, it is created, and that the awareness of this absence can lead to a collapse, or a revolt. The revolt to continue anyway, to live in spite, to laugh, to love, to fall, to start again. Not because there is a why, but because there is now. The problem is that this kind of response requires more courage than faith, and the lucid mind, accustomed to seeking logical guarantees, is not always ready to act without certainty. This is the dilemma of knowledge. It reveals, but does not console. It illuminates, but does not protect. And for many, that light is too strong. That's why the journey of deep lucidity can lead to paralysis or cynicism. You understand so much of the world behind the scenes that you can no longer take part in the play. Life becomes a constant observation, an emotional detachment, an analysis that never ends. And when everything becomes an interpretation, no one dances anymore. But Camus proposes the opposite. He says, since there is no script, create your own. Since there is no answer, respond with presence. This is the absurd revolt, not against suffering, but against the emptiness that would try to silence you. It's the gesture of carrying on even though you know it's all going to end. To love even though you know you might lose. Giving yourself up even though you know the pain will come. And, above all, not waiting for life to make sense before living it. Nietzsche called this fati love, the love of destiny. Not as resignation, but as affirmation. The choice to say yes to the chaotic flow of existence, with all that it carries, beauty, tragedy, pleasure, loss. Consciousness doesn't have to destroy us, but in order to do so, it needs to stop demanding certainties. It needs to accept that the absolute truth may just be the fact that everything changes, and that, even so, it's worth being here. Lucidity only becomes intolerable when we believe it should guide us to a conclusion. But perhaps its role was never that. Perhaps it only exists to show us that the game has no fixed rules, and that, precisely because of this, we are free to play as we wish. But then, if there's no guaranteed meaning, what do we do with all this awareness? And how to live with it, without withdrawing from life? That's what brings us to the end. Having come this far, you may have realized that the question has never been knowing too much, but rather what we do with what we know. Lucidity isn't the end of peace, it's just the end of illusion. And when we stop demanding that life be easy, permanent, or fair, perhaps for the first time we are really ready to live it as it is. Raw, changeable, imperfect, but profoundly beautiful for that very reason. Yes, seeing too much hurts, understanding too much isolates, and being aware of the fragility of everything can make every joy seem like a danger in disguise. But what if it's precisely this fragility that gives value to the instant? What if the fact that we know everything will end is, paradoxically, the only valid reason to give yourself over completely while it's still happening? In Greek mythology, there is a little remembered character called Tiresias. He was a seer, a man condemned to see everything, know everything, anticipate everything. He knew what was coming. He knew the fate of kings, the end of wars, the price of desires. But unlike other oracles, he didn't use this knowledge to manipulate the world. He just watched, and he suffered. His conscience was a burden. The more he knew, the more he withdrew from human life. Tiresias is, in a way, the first portrait of someone who had seen too much, and therefore no longer knew how to live among those who still expected some surprise from the world. But even he didn't give up the act of going on. And this is where we come back to Camus. Camus asks, if life is absurd, why go on living? And he answers boldly, because the very awareness of the absurd can be an engine of freedom. Because when we realize that the world has no prefabricated meaning, we stop waiting and start creating. We live not for reward, we live by choice. And here is the answer to the question that gives all this its title. Yes, ignorance can be a blessing, but it's an empty blessing, inert, warm. It protects, but it doesn't transform. It comforts, but does not expand. Lucidity, on the other hand, doesn't promise comfort, but it offers something much rarer: authenticity. It allows you to see the world as it is and still choose to dance. Even if you know the ending, you can still be moved by the story. Even if you're aware of the pain, you still want to feel love. That's not naivety, that's courage. And for you who are on this path, who feel too much, understand too much, who wonder if it's worth continuing to learn, think, dive in. I'm not going to tell you that it's going to be easy, because it won't be. But it doesn't have to be either. What you're looking for isn't a quiet life, it's a real life. And that has another price, yes, but also another reward. You will lose the lightness of those who don't ask, but you will gain the clarity of those who choose. You'll give up the comfort of certainties, but you will live with the intensity of someone who embraces chaos with open eyes. And the more you know, the more you can decide how you want to exist. Is ignorance bliss? Perhaps. But lucidity is freedom. If you've made it this far, you've already taken a step beyond most people. You're subscribed to the channel, you watch the videos, you reflect on every idea. Now the question is, how far do you want to take this? If you want to take the next step and truly apply this knowledge to your life, the White Rabbit Codes is ready for you. The link is in the pinned comment. Remember, success is a decision. The choice is yours. Count on me and follow the White Rabbit.